Well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this week's broadcast. Today we'll be watching a message from David J. Smith titled Chemical Biological Warfare. This is message number 751. David J. first delivered this message way back on December 9th, 1995. And I am Tim West. This message is from 29 and a half years ago. David starts right off by explaining the plan that the individuals who are trying to rule the world have stated that they're going to impose upon all of planet Earth. And we can see that each step of their plan is in full swing today. So keep in mind, this may be new information to you, but it's not new information. This has been in the making for quite some time now. We'll get right into today's message with David J. Smith because, well, I'm still working on the issues from the broadcasting system. I'm currently using my backup system to get these broadcasts out on time without any interruptions. Somehow the satanic influence seems to break through and disrupt things right before the feast days, whether it's spring or fall. Some of you experienced the issue the day before Pentecost, and thank you for bringing that to my attention. Everything was working fine that morning, and then 10 minutes before the broadcast, people started alerting me of this issue. So I had 10 minutes to shift everything over to my backup process. Anyway, enough about my problems. Let's listen to David J. as he points out the current problems in the world today. So, grab something to sip on, some lunch, or your favorite snack. Find a comfortable place to relax and enjoy today's message.
Newswatch magazine presents the analysis of world news in the light of Bible prophecy with David J. Smith.
Is there a real population explosion in the world today? Or is it a myth? We need to realize that population on planet Earth at this moment is such that it could literally stand in the state of Oregon. That's every single person on the face of the earth. They could stand back to back, shoulder to shoulder in the state of Oregon and have every single person within the state borders. Does that mean that there's enough soil, however, that could literally feed all those people? Or is there only enough soil to sustain, as the globalists say, about 2.5 billion people on planet Earth and a comfortable lifestyle? When we look down the corridors of time, Jesus Christ of Nazareth made a very significant statement in Matthew 24, verse 37. He said, "But in the days of Noah, so shall also be the coming of the Son of Man." Just what was one of those items that was happening that could fulfill that statement? What was happening before the flood that literally caused Jesus Christ to make such a statement? Notice also now in Genesis chapter 6, verse 1, and then verse 8. "And it came to pass when men began to multiply," that's a population explosion on the face of the earth. Then verse 8 it says, "Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord." So God did prophesy that there would be a population explosion at the very close of the age, just before His return to establish the kingdom of God on planet Earth. Following World War II, something happened that was to have very tremendous significance for all the future of mankind. The intellectuals took note of this happening and brought it to the attention of the world elite behind the scenes that literally run the world, called the Illuminati. The elite were very visibly shaken by what was reported to them, and so they began to sit down to figure out the repercussions of what would take place because of this happening. They were told that by or shortly after the year 2000 AD, the total collapse of civilization as we know it today and the possibility of the extinction of the human race could occur on this planet. It could occur, that is, if we didn't destroy the earth first with nuclear weapons. Jesus Christ had already prophesied the possibility and the probability of nuclear extinction nearly 2,000 years ago, or the extinction of planet Earth by asteroids and meteorites plunging into the atmosphere of the earth, not burning up, when he said in Matthew 24, verse 21 and 22 from the New International Version, "For then there will be great distress, unequal from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened." So something big was prophesied to happen at the very close of the age. These elitists of the world, called the Illuminati, the movers and shakers of the world, they were told that the only things that could stop these predicted events would be severe cutbacks of the human population. There would have to be a retardation of technology, and there would have to be a slowdown of economic growth eventually. They said they would have to eliminate meat from the human diet. And the reason why was because the human body needs protein. You eliminate protein and people begin to get sick, weaken. Their immune systems can be broken down. Therefore, it would be easy to introduce into society a series of biological agents that would create disaster on planet Earth. They said that there would have to be strict control of future human reproduction. There would have to be limits placed on the number of children that a family could have. A total commitment to the preservation of the environment by every nation on earth. Then they said, as a last possibility, there would have to be the colonization of space and man transplanted to other planets to survive. They then said that they would have to set about on a propaganda program to bring about a tremendous evolutionary change or shift in the consciousness of man so that they would accept all the programs they would initiate to stop overpopulation. Those in power immediately formed an alliance. They set about bringing the recommended changes to fruition through propaganda, mind control, and other types of manipulation of the masses on the planet. You might even say the Illuminati's prayers were answered. You see, the Illuminati are those who have been illuminated by Lucifer, who fell from God's angelic host and became known as Satan the devil. And Satan is the one giving rise to the end-time system that we see today. International socialism, communism in the Eastern world and in the Orient, and in the Western world, Fabian socialism. What was this tremendous event that caused so much consternation, and it changed forever the future of the world for millions of human beings? Millions of soldiers returned home after World War II. When the soldiers came home, they found very eager, lonely women waiting for them. As a direct result, the greatest coupling in human history took place. The result was that everyone that was born between 1941 1955 children, they were produced by this greatest coupling in human history. It was people like you and me and everyone who lives today practically who is of 55 years and younger. It was the great baby boom of World War II. It was the culmination of all of man's efforts to survive through history. It was modern medicine, prolonged life. It was better diets, help to prolong life. It was heat in the wintertime and cool air conditioning in the summertime to help prolong life. It was pure water and the proper disposal of sewage. All of this together, it was the point in history when the birth rate so exceeded the death rate that the world's population was forecast to double between the year 1957 and 1990. It was the most wonderful time in history for those who grew up in the 50s, and yet it's the most dangerous time to be alive. It signaled the end of man's most precious achievement, an alliance of all of the powers on earth, openly advocating world government such as communism and the hidden powers of the Illuminati, and those who advocated Fabian socialism, the passing of laws to socialize a nation. They all came together. They decided that individual freedom could no longer be tolerated. It would be in the interest of the preservation of the human race to have a totalitarian dictatorship, a one-world government, so that man could survive into the 21st century. They believed that the common man could not be trusted to control himself, that man would abuse everything they were trying to do. Therefore, they had to initiate force on the human race. What had been the unfulfilled dreams of many individual groups working for world government became reality by the centralization or the concentration of power in the alliance known as the Bilderberger Group today. They had their first official meeting in 1954, and they meet every year, either once or twice, ever since then, to plan strategy for global government and to implement their programs. What had been impossible, because they were all fragmented groups before, was now promised to happen. World government. The New World Order that so many individuals had envisioned all the way from Adam Weishaupt in 1776 when he founded the modern day version of the Illuminati on May 1st, all the way down to the present day Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, all the other subversive organizations working for world government. Now it was a certainty that they would have their government. A study was made during World War II to determine the impact of the returning soldiers upon the economy in the United States and Western Europe. The results literally mobilized the ruling elite. A second study then was made in 1957 by scientists meeting at Huntsville, Alabama, at the military base there. It confirmed the results of the first study. The conclusion was that civilization as we know it today would collapse shortly after the year 2000 unless the population was seriously curtailed. The study expressed a concern that since atomic weapons existed, that they would eventually be used. Total worldwide disarmament was urged. So they set about their programs for disarmament. Congress even adopted the disarmament plan and created the United States Disarmament Agency. President Dwight D. Eisenhower had this to say, and I quote from a 1957 speech: "As a result of lowered infant mortality, longer lives, and the accelerating conquest of famine," in other words, they were doing away with famine, "there is underway a population explosion so incredibly great that in a little more than a generation, the population of the world is expected to double." End of quote. A third study that was then made by the Club of Rome, one of the elitist think tanks. And this study ended in 1968, and it determined the limits of growth that they were allowing the countries of the world to have. The Club of Rome was commissioned to develop a computer model of the world so as to predict the outcome of the corrections needed by society, so that the world would not collapse economically and socially after the year 2000. The only people that could implement this program would be the elitists of the world, the billionaires, those who could purchase for themselves government posts. They could send their agents into governments and pass legislation to make countries such as the United States, Great Britain, Western European democracies, so it could change their laws to prepare it for world government. The Club of Rome was also asked to develop a computer model for a new world order. Both tasks were accomplished. They divided the world up into 10 global regions based upon economics. And therefore, the book of Revelation, where 10 kings will give their power unto the beast, is now made possible since these studies came about. Studies were done to determine a method to stop or slow down the population explosion before the point of no return would be reached. It was determined that an immediate attack on the problem would involve 2 points. Number one, the first was to lower the birth rate. The second was to increase the death rate. Remember, these individuals, if they believe there's a problem, they definitely are going to take steps to take care of the problem. To lower the birth rate, they started developing several programs that was hoisted upon the world through the United Nations organization and its affiliated agencies. The first was the development of the positive birth control methods, using mechanical methods such as a diaphragm, condoms, and so they give them out even to school children nowadays. A second was the chemical or the use of foam birth control pills. Then you had the medical, which is surgery, sterilization, abortion, hysterectomy, so women can no longer have children. Those were developed and implemented in America and in the rest of the world. And they set about sterilizing the women in India and other countries, third world countries. Then they founded, through money from the Rockefeller Foundation, the Women's Liberation Movement. It was started with a demand for free abortions upon demand, using pro-choice as the rallying cry so they could reduce the number of births in the world. Homosexuality was now encouraged, and gay liberation was born. They brought it out of the closets to make it fashionable to become a homosexual, because you see, homosexuals do not have children. But it also, as in the days of Lot, Sodom and Gomorrah, it is an abomination to God. So these people have turned America into a modern day Sodom and Gomorrah, and it has become an abomination to God Almighty and to His Son Jesus Christ. They introduce zero population growth. this became the hot topic in Washington, D.C. They wanted to reduce the population all over the world to zero so that you would only replace yourself and not have 3 children or 4, but 2 or 1. This way the population would slow down. The only alternative left to the world's ruling elite was to increase the death rate, since they did not reach their zero population growth target. So they had to set out to figure out a way to reduce the population by killing human beings. Can you imagine the difficulty that they were having? What if the general population found out that they were implementing programs to kill human beings? That would be declared murder. So they had to come up with a way. They could, of course, use limited nuclear strikes. This was not ruled out, and it's still on the back burner in case they ever need it as a means of population control. War will happen. A third world war will come before the year 2000. Someone high up in government who sits in the strategy meetings called our office one day and said, "I can't identify myself because if I was exposed, I would be fired and the possibility of imprisonment. But the government of the United States has already sat down and planned 12 separate strategies in order to start a third world war. And if strategy 1 does not work, they will go to strategy 2. And they will eliminate each one until a war does occur. There will be a major conflict. This is this man's words, not mine. He said they had it planned before the year 2000. That time is rapidly approaching. Notice from the New International Version, Revelation chapter 9, I'll only hit a few highlights from verse 12 to 19. It starts talking about the first woe is past. 2 more are yet to come. And then on down in the verse it says the number of the mounted troops was 200 million. I heard the number. So there's going to be a mighty military apparatus. And what was the very purpose of this? It was to have war. And it says that in this entire text that there's going to be a third of mankind to die. 1/3 of the population. And you cannot understand how this happens unless you understand the Illuminati, who they are, why they're implementing their program, and that Satan wants to be declared God through his human agent. He wants to be the one to be worshiped by all mankind, and he's going to eliminate certain of the population to bring it down to those who are loyal to his program. In the meantime, something else had to be done that would absolve the decision makers of all guilt and place the blame on those who did not lead clean lives. Something that could be blamed on, such as Mother Nature. It was a freak accident of history. So what they needed was some type of bubonic plague to install it on the backs of the human race to reduce the population. The Club of Rome, once again, a think tank for the New World Order, came up with the answer. Enter Dr. Aurelio Pecci of the Club of Rome. Several top secret recommendations were made by Dr. Aurelio Pecci of the Club of Rome. He advocated that a plague should be introduced that would have the same effect as the famous Black Plague that scourged Europe and reduced the population by 1/3. The chief recommendation was to develop a microbe which would attack the automatic immune system built into our human body. And it would render a vaccine impossible. So nobody would be able to be cured of this. They would have their own vaccine though, but they would tell the population there is no cure. And once they reduced the population, then suddenly they would come up with this miracle cure. The orders were given to develop the microbe. The orders were also given to develop a prophylactic and a cure for this particular plague. The microbe would be used against the general population. That's you and that's me. And that's people just like us. And then only when it was necessary would they introduce the vaccine to stop the plague. The prophylactic was to be for the ruling elite so that they would not come down with a disease. The cure would be administered to the survivors once the population had been reduced. This plan is a part of Global 2000 that was given at that time to former President Jimmy Carter of the United States of America. Dr. Auriello Pecchi stated on page 607 of that report, the Global 2000 report to the President, that the human race, and of course they believe in evolution, and that Lucifer is watching over the evolution of mankind. He said that mankind had evolved to such a state that we were literally the moderators of life on planet Earth, and that we had to be willing to selectively choose the undesirable of our species and be willing to eliminate them. Funding for this project was obtained from the United States Congress under House Bill 15,090 in 1969. $10 million was granted to the Department of Defense's 1970 budget. Testimony before the Senate committee revealed that they intended to produce, and I quote, a synthetic biological agent, an agent that does not naturally exist and for which no natural immunity could be acquired. Within the next 5 to 10 years, it would be probable that it would infect much of the population. Within 5 to 10 years after they had discovered it in the laboratories. This was to be infectious. There was to be no known cure, and it was to eat away at the immune system so that we would be able to catch every disease that was floating around in the air. And therefore the population would be reduced greatly. A man by the name of Sir Julian Huxley stated, and I quote, "Overpopulation, in my opinion, is the most serious threat to the whole future of our species." End of quote. This project, called MK-Naomi, was carried out at Fort Detrick, Maryland. This is where, if you saw the movie Outbreak, you'll realize there's 4 levels where they deal with infectious diseases. The 4th level down is no known cure. And now they've even discovered someone in the Ivory Coast, as I'm speaking and taping this, that has the Ebola virus, of which there is no cure. Are they going to set out to destroy the continent of Africa? We'll wait and see. Remember, if the Illuminati, those individuals who are the ruling elite of the world, if they believe there is a population explosion that literally threatens this world, they will do whatever is necessary to act upon that. And they will seek out a solution. Since large numbers of population were to be decimated, the ruling elite decided to target the undesirable elements of society. They specifically targeted black, Hispanic, and homosexual populations. The homosexuals were encouraged on one hand, and yet they were scheduled for extinction on the other hand. Now, I've got to stop here just for a moment in my message and explain something. The Illuminati are Satan worshipers. They prefer to call him Lucifer. They believe he is the light bringer. They literally believe that he is God and that Jesus Christ is the God of darkness, while Lucifer or Satan is the God of light. They've got everything backwards. So they work just as fervent to establish their God, who is no God at all but a fallen angel, his kingdom on planet Earth. So they established what is called international communism today. Albert Pike, who is the head of Freemasonry, Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, and Giuseppe Mazzini of Italy, who was the head of political action for the Illuminati, set about the program for the 20th century in order to bring about world government. They said there had to be 2 world wars and a possibility of a 3rd world war. All this was written on paper in 1871 and 72 and was found in the British Museum of Natural History until 1977, when all the documents suddenly disappeared. Right after a Rothschild stepped onto the board of directors of that museum. Communism is broken down into 2 separate forms. International communism, that we talk about most of the time, they overthrow by force, military might, and then they kill up to half the population ruthlessly. Then you have what is called Fabian socialism. Fabian socialism is the slow, gradual takeover of a country with a constitution by imposing laws to socialize it, so that ultimately you have the same form of government in what is supposed to be a free society like the United States or Great Britain, and in Russia. Even though theirs was imposed by the military, ours is imposed by government agents passing laws. Then little by little, they pass the laws that sets up a centralized police force so that then they can begin to eliminate the undesirables in society. The undesirables in society in the United States of America are the patriots, those who believe in the Constitution of the United States, right-wing Christians, you might say, those who believe in Bible prophecy, the second coming of Jesus Christ, homeschoolers, those that will not take shots, because you see, shots is their method to help once again reduce the population. Even though they're billed to give people immunity against disease, you look at the stats and you'll find 1 out of 4 people affected have many, many side effects that are detrimental to their health the rest of their life. The international communists, those who impose their will by force, how are they going to help reduce the population of the world? In 1980, a man by the name of Jose Romero, and this is a fictitious name. I'm using it to cover up his real name, otherwise he would be eliminated. He escaped from Cuba with secret knowledge of a development that was so terrifying that it would even surpass the Cuban Missile Crisis of the 1960s. He gave stark details that he related to the Defense Intelligence Agency known as DIA. In the 1960s, Romero studied chemistry at a college near Havana, Cuba. Later, he was enrolled in a special army school just outside of Cuba. He was trained by Soviet instructors as a chemical and biological warfare advisor to Fidel Castro's army. The Russians taught him that bacteria produced in rats, flies, and in other organisms could be introduced into an enemy's atmosphere, airborne, or their water supply. Romero said that he had been shown pictures of United States cities that were possible chemical and biological weapons targets. One Soviet briefing claimed that a deadly toxin that was strategically placed along the Mississippi River could contaminate a third of the United States population. Romero's study was verified by others who defected from Cuba also. One of those was a personal interpreter of Fidel Castro. Both of these defectors have described Soviet chemical biological units and underground storage sites in Cuba, and that they were so sensitive they were protected by surface-to-air missiles, and those with their surface-to-air missile sites that the Cuban Missile Crisis nearly was set off by. And yet people today say that there were no such things as Cuban missiles and Russian Soviet missiles in Cuba. And yet these defectors to the United States verified they were there protecting the biological chemical agents that had already been manufactured and were being manufactured. These facilities, according to one of these defectors, warned, and I quote, are part of a chemical and biological strategic system developed by the Soviets and more dangerous than anyone in the United States can realize, end of quote. Why would this be this dangerous? What is it about chemical and biological agents? Are they more dangerous than a nuclear weapon? Are they equal? Or is it just a scare tactic? Reports had been reaching the Defense Intelligence Agency headquarters that the Soviets were putting into practice in Asia what they had been preaching and teaching in Cuba's chemical biological warfare schools. In March of 1981, a Thai citizen died from poison that was placed in the drinking water by Vietnamese troops. Others in the same community that drank from the same water began to bleed profusely from the nose, from the mouth. 2 months later, Thai soldiers actually captured 2 Vietnamese trying to poison the water supply in Kampucheon. This was a relocation camp in Thailand. Then from Afghanistan came horror report after report of poisonings and gassings. And a favorite Soviet strategy of literally pouring deadly chemicals into the guerrillas, these are the people who are fighting against the communists, into their underground canals and in their irrigation ditches. This is how they began to destroy the resistors in Afghanistan. Victims of the Soviet-made chemical and biological agents have included Lao Hill tribesmen in Asia, the Kampucheon resistance fighters, the resistance fighters in Afghanistan, Thai soldiers, Iranian Revolutionary Guards that were on the side of the United States rather than the Ayatollah Khomeini, Chinese soldiers, even civilians of the Soviet Union. To be exact, about 30,000 civilians in one community were allowed to be sprayed by these bacteriological and chemical agents. Descriptions of the slaughter of these individuals were horrendous when they came in to the Defense Intelligence Agency. The biologically produced poison has become known as yellow rain, and it caused its victims to literally bleed through every single body orifice, including the eyes, the ears. Soviet nerve gas caused terrible, what they called a terrible dance of death. It would cause breathing difficulty to begin with, then sweating, then nausea, vomiting, followed by cramps, involuntary defecation and urination, then a jerking and staggering. Finally, the victims would collapse in convulsions and succumbing or dying in complete paralysis and asphyxiation. One chemical agent used in Afghanistan literally caused corpses to bloat abnormally, and then the skin would begin to turn black, it would begin to flake, and in less than 1 day the entire body, skin, and the internal organs had flaked away, and there was nothing but skeleton laying there. This is what they have on the drawing boards. No wonder Jesus said that unless he intervened in world affairs, no flesh would be saved. And as other translations have accurately put it, saved alive. Because man is now interfering with nature. Only one new Soviet agent, this is chemical and biological agents, seems to be relatively merciful to those who are given it. It's called the silent killer. This is spread by Soviet troops in the eastern and northeastern provinces of Afghanistan starting in mid-1981, running on until they finally took that country for communism. This worked so swiftly that victims literally froze in place and died instantly. This is what the world is giving to us today. This is what has been handed to us on a silver platter by the international communists, those who believe in the violent overthrow and then the violent killing of the population to reduce it by the year 2000. Soviet deployment of chemical and biological weapons is not something that's just come on the scene lately. Red Army troops captured by the Germans during World War II told of extensive Soviet programs that began in 1939, including the development of a powdery yellow-brown agent called Lebeda. And it was sprayed from aircrafts onto the populations. A Soviet scientist who defected in the 1950s reported that political prisoners were fed this toxic material in ground up meat. And then they would closely monitor the reactions in the human body. And then a more recent Soviet defector revealed that the Central Committee of the Communist Party and the Ministry of Defense both specifically approved research into psychochemicals and biological toxins to be used on the West. Do we believe the communists are still our enemies? Do we believe all the pronouncements that they said, "We will bury you"? Do we believe it when they said, first we'll take Central Europe, then the masses of Asia, then we will surround America and it'll be the last bastion of capitalism and it will fall into our hands? Do we believe that we are the target for international communism, but we've been told it's dead? Then why in the world on December 8th 1995 at 3 o'clock in the morning did NBC television come on with a television news special. And then on CNBC at 6 a.m. Eastern Time came on with the same special, how government officials in Washington, D.C. were absolutely livid because they've discovered Soviet submarines with 10 multiple warheads each within a short distance of the east and west coast of the United States. They actually took film from our own submarines, proving they were spying upon our own submarines. And they had the capability of hitting any city in America. And you know what they reported? These surface-to-air missiles, or sea-to-air missiles, were capable of carrying chemical, biological agents. This was one day before the taping of this message. Is communism dead? I got a bridge to sell you out in the desert if you believe it. No, the enemy of Christianity has always been Luciferianism, international communism. And they said, we will bury you. And this is only one way that they've been training and preparing their people for the day when they take America. They must have a way to eliminate those who will not fit themselves into the New World Order, and then reduce the population of the world to fit their criteria, that their God, who is no God at all but Satan the devil, an adversary of Jesus Christ, and God our Father, has told them. So they listen to their master, and they do his bidding. Certain intelligence analysts were so upset because of this biological and toxins weapons convention violation. See, the convention was signed in 1972. They didn't want to believe the Soviets were violating this convention. And so they gave little credence to any of the reports that were passed on to them. But finally, in 1979, all that began to change. A massive explosion rocked the area around a Soviet installation called Sverdlovsk. That's a Russian name. I don't speak Russian. Maybe somebody else does. But it was in the Ural Mountain area. Within 4 days, the first 7 or 8 victims who came into the hospital there for treatment, they began to choke. They began to have high fevers. Their ears turned blue. Their lips turned blue. Breathing difficulties became so bad that within 6 to 7 hours, every one of them had died. Over the next 2 months, over 1,000 people who lived in that area, who came into contact with these biological and chemical agents due to this explosion, died. This was in the 1970s, late 70s. Not until the following April did former President Jimmy Carter receive the unequivocal report of, quote, strong evidence that a biological production or storage site is at this facility, end of quote. I guess so. With over 1,000 dying, he had to admit it finally. So they began an investigation to find out what really was going on. Then intelligence has identified another major biological weapon. This related research and production installation was at Sikorsky. And there were 6 other sites identified in the late 70s and early 1980s where the Soviets are building biological weapons. And their most modern surface-to-air missiles carry the biological agents. To be exact, they even sold the military equipment in order to do this to the Iraqis in the mid-1980s. Government foot dragging about this finally produced an investigation after the documents came to their attention. Yellow rain gassings began to happen among the Hmong people of Laos. The gassings appeared to be retribution against that tribe because they fought for the United States against the communists in Laos until we pulled out in April of 1975. And those people would see gassings, helicopters coming over and dropping agents out of the back of it. And they termed it yellow rain. This began in the summer of 1975. Remember, this was 3 full years after the treaty banning all chemical and biological agents from being produced and ever used. So, of course, the Soviets were breaking it. Didn't Lenin make it very clear that all treaties are like pie crust to be broken? They only signed a treaty so the United States, which was a moral country, and at that time claiming to be a Christian country, because of a 9-0 decision of the Supreme Court of the United States declaring it a Christian country in 1892. And so we would live by the treaties, and they would work in secret till they gained the upper hand. Just like they stated in the 1930s, Manilovsky, who was the head of the War Machine School in Moscow, said, "We will bring about the greatest peace proposal in history when we have a 6-to-8-1 ratio in military equipment over the West. And once we do that, we will smash them with a clenched fist." What does Ezekiel 38 and 39 say? It says, "On the mountains of Israel." And it doesn't mean just little tiny Israel in the Middle East, because you have to do an in-depth study as to who Israel really is in the Bible. The house of Israel, the 10 northern tribes taken into national captivity 130 years before Judah and Benjamin went into captivity at the hands of the Babylonians. So you have whole books of the Bible distinguishing 2 separate dynasty of kings, the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And the number one target of international communism has always been the United States of America. It hasn't changed. By 1979 in September, after the United States government sent a contingency of investigators into Laos, they found that by that time already 4,600 of their 400,000 population of the Hmong people had already died of yellow rain. As of this taping in 1995, out of 400,000, there is 75,000 left alive. The only reason they're alive is they fled across the Mekong River and they went into a different country, and that saved their lives. Among the literally millions of hours of intercepted communications, which the National Security Agency routinely receives over their communication devices, they began to put together some of the pieces of the puzzle as to whether the Soviets were literally using these chemical biological agents or not. One piece revealed that the Laotian army, they had a chemical unit in that country, and they were visited by a Soviet military team on February 7th, 1979, 7 years after the convention to ban biological agents from wartime usage. And it said that he went there to prepare Soviet manufactured chemical items for inspection by other dignitaries who were coming into the area. Another one of those messages that was intercepted revealed that a Soviet team of 7 chemical artillery experts was scheduled to inspect chemical supplies in one of the areas in Laos. And that was in June of 1979. And a third message, which they intercepted, indicated the Soviets would be looking over the same chemical agents used against the Hmong people, proving they were gassing those people, and that's why they died. Finally, on February 2nd, 1982, 6 years after all of these attacks began, an international intelligence report concluded that the Soviets were directing chemical biological training, storage, and use by the Pathet Lao and the Vietnamese forces in Laos. So finally, they actually stated publicly what everybody knew was happening all the time because of so many reports that were coming in. It also charged the Soviets with using deadly chemicals in Afghanistan to subjugate those people for international communism. One aspect of the attacks was unexplained. What was the killing agent in Yellow Rain? The government couldn't figure it out. Then a journalist by the name of Sterling Seagrave, later the author of the book Yellow Rain, and then an Army medical intelligence specialist by the name of Sharon Watson, discovered that peasants killed by a fungal poison in the Russian district during World War II was the identical type of symptoms that the people in Laos were having. So they did a study, and they came to the conclusion that the Russians perished and the Laotians perished of the trichothecene toxin, which is T2. And so this was what was being sprayed on the Laotian people and the Hmong people. So the government of the United States began to run other surveys to find out what was happening. But you see, those in the mass media, those in the places of education in the United States who are a part of the Illuminati, they set about immediately to cover up and give other explanations as to why the people were dying. They said, oh, bees came into the area and left some fungi on the leaves, and the people rubbed up against it, and so they're dying from it. No, there's so many variations of climates where the people lived there that this was an impossibility, and this was pointed out by Representative Jim Leach, who was a Republican from Iowa. And so they shot down every single excuse our government and its agents were using to cover up the facts that chemical and biological weapons were being used. Does the Bible literally say in any way whatsoever that there will be times in the end of the age that will be so threatening that unless Jesus Christ returns to this earth, no flesh could be saved? Yes, it does. To be exact, the Apostle Paul says, in the last days, perilous times will come. So perilous that if you might even breathe the air in certain areas, just like in the movie Outbreak that came in order to brainwash the American people, get us prepared to accept an airborne chemical biological agent, and to think that it was naturally occurring in planet Earth instead of being manufactured and hoisted upon us by those who are wanting to reduce the population. There has been a marked decline through the 1980s by the Soviets in their chemical biological warfares. The decline started in the 1983 summer season. And United States Ambassador Eugene Douglas is the one who began to track this information and saw that world, I guess you might call it Pressure from all the populations, the cities, and the countries of the world was placed on the Soviets to stop using biological agents. But I'm here to tell you it's only going to be temporary. Because you see, there's two sides to every coin. One of them is international communists that do things by brute force. Then on the flip side of the coin are the Fabian socialists who do everything slowly. They pass laws. They do things in secret. For instance, one gentleman who was a part of the New World Order for over 25 years, a Dr. Carroll Quigley, before he died, he taught at Georgetown University, which trains people to become Rhodes Scholars in London, England. These Rhodes Scholars are taught globalism. They take their place in governments in England, all over the British Empire and the United States. Then they accelerate the passing of laws for world government. Dr. Carroll Quigley wrote a book over 1,000 pages called Tragedy and Hope. In that book, he said the greatest tragedy in the world was about to happen to the population of planet Earth. But there was hope. And that hope was in the ruling elite, that they would have a survival method for some of the population. He said his only problem with this world government program was that in the United States and Western Europe, they wanted to keep it secret from the population. They didn't want anybody to know that they were even working for world government. They didn't want anybody to know the United Nations was sat down and planned and plotted to come into existence even before World War I. And after that war, they had the League of Nations, and when our Senate would not accept it, it collapsed. So then they had to set about to create another war, a second world war, to bring about a world government through one of their international organizations. So even before the war was over, we began to talk about our troops, the United Nations troops in Europe fighting Nazism. And so by the time the war was over, the name United Nations was into the minds of the individuals. So our government then sent delegates to San Francisco for the foundation of the United Nations organization, and every single delegate from the Treasury and State Department of the United States was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, except one. And the Council on Foreign Relations was founded in 1921 and incorporated in the United States by a whole host of Marxists. And the most famous of those was Colonel Edward Mandell House, who wrote a book called Philip Drew Administrator, showing how the United States was to be socialized as dreamed of by Karl Marx. In order to do this, they have to have a method of reducing the population, of ridding the population of those individuals who are undesirables, who will not fit themselves into the New World Order. That's why they came up with the plan of chemical, biological agents. That's why they came up with AIDS, to introduce it into the homosexual populations in San Francisco and New York and a few other cities. That's why they ran ads in the newspapers asking for healthy homosexual males. And they were to test certain vaccines, shots, and they were given in the hepatitis B vaccines, the AIDS virus. That's why, even in modern day today, Fabian socialists that are working in England, the rest of Western Europe, and in the United States were willing, with our own CIA, to introduce a program in Boca Raton, Florida. The PIT company, which literally manufactured cyanide. And then they began to develop in the laboratory certain agents that they were keeping from the American population. Then without fail, they had to create a war, because you see, they determined that they did not want blame to be cast upon them. They had to reduce the population, but how could they reduce that population and them as individuals not be blamed for it? So in Boca Raton, Florida, Ishwan Barbuti founded his Ishwan Barbuti International, IBI Corporation, in a joint venture with the CIA. And when they hired Peter Kawaja in order to set up security for that particular operation, that was their fatal mistake. They literally manufactured these biological agents, which 40% of the HIV/AIDS virus was in the envelope. It's sort of like an all-purpose vitamin. It's got vitamin A, B, all the B group, vitamin C in it, vitamin E, everything composited into one vitamin. So they created a biological with 40% of the AIDS virus and other chemical biological agents in this envelope. And then they sold it to the Iraqis. This was documented in 1989, before there was a Desert Storm war. And then all of a sudden, George Bush had to have a war in the Middle East. You see, what was really happening was, in the oil industry, OPEC, all the Arab rulers had a joint communique with one another. They acted in concert, in consistent agreement with one another. They fixed the oil price and fixed the amount of production so that the world price for oil would stay at a reasonable price. When the Kuwaitis were overproducing year after year and driving the prices down, Iraq was simply going to step over and say, tap them on the shoulder and say, let's keep the prices within the agreed range. So the United States ambassador over there, Ms. Gillespie, said, we'll not interfere. And so Saddam Hussein was given a green light to move right in and correct the Kuwaitis. And under false pretenses, the Gulf War was started. But the real reason for the Gulf War was because the Illuminati had to reduce the world's population. And even though they introduced the AIDS virus into the Western world, they introduced it into Central Africa and wiped out nearly a third of the African continent, it was not developing as fast as they wanted it to. So the population was not dying fast enough. So they had to have a quicker way to reduce the population. So they sold all of these biologicals through the IBI Corporation and the World Credit Corporation, CCC, to Iraq. They put them in their Scud missiles, and then 28 countries band together to go over. This was the perfect setting, because here were representatives from 28 countries going into the Middle East. If they could spread and spray biologicals on representatives of 28 countries, that means this airborne disease, which is incurable right now, they're the only ones that has the antidote, and no one else knows it. Then they could spread it to 28 countries rapidly, and the world's population could begin to be reduced. So all of a sudden the war breaks out. Scud missiles began to fly over our boys, and they're exploding in air. And our news media begins to tell us that our Pioneer missiles are just shooting the Scuds down, and they're so accurate. Then finally, when it began to leak by our boys who were over there, the media had to backtrack and begin to tell the truth, that they were shooting down maybe 1 out of 4, and the rest of them exploded in the air over the heads of the military. And what they saw coming out of them was some type of fog, some type of spray. And they all began to get sick. And by the time they got home and the war was over, and in 2 different times, up to 1 million Americans went over there. Today, currently, over 7,000 of those veterans have already died. 2 out of 3 of the children born to those veterans who have come home have had no arms. Their little hands were attached to their shoulders, no legs, 1 eye in their head, some type of deformity. 2 out of 3, all because of this biological agent that was hoisted upon the 28-nation contingency of the United Nations. So the Illuminati got their way. They're spreading an airborne agent to destroy the population. And what's so frightening about all of this is that if an individual, say a veteran, no matter what country they're in, because they're dying in other countries too, if they come up and hug their little children and kiss them, they could pass on because it's airborne. It even comes out in the sweat in your skin. It is not just, as they said about AIDS, sexually transmitted, which is a lie to begin with. This is airborne. Somebody with a cold can cough, and everybody in the room would eventually get this virus, whatever it is, and they would become a carrier of it. They may not die, but see, the symptoms are slow. It's like a time-release pill. Say you have a cold and you take one of these contacts, I believe that's advertised, to be time-released so that they'll work over a 12-hour period. So these retroviruses and so on that was sprayed on the boys over there in the Middle East, they get the virus, it burrows deep down into the cells, and as it begins to come out of the cells, and it begins to spread to various parts of the body, you can start aching in your joints, your muscles. You begin to be fatigued. And there are so many different symptoms because they made it an envelope of chemical biological agents, so that no one person would come up with the same necessarily symptom. There may be 10 people standing there and they all have different symptoms, and so the VA would say, oh, you're not feeling well, take an aspirin, go home, go to bed. 2 months later, they're dead. This is what's happening in America. And when ABC television went down to interview Peter Kawaja, who broke this story, and then when they finally only aired a couple of minutes of him and nothing of importance was said, he called them and they said, we can't air this story. It'll topple the United States government. These people know what they're doing. When you had a president, former President George Bush, who was a member of the Trilateral Commission working for world government and the subversion of the United States to merge it into a one world government under the United Nations. He was also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He was a Bilderberger member. He was a member of the Bohemian Club. He was also a member of Skull and Bones. ultra-secret organization of Yale University. 15 initiates, seniors each year, are inducted into it. And he is working for world government. Do you think he was going to stop this and tell the media what was going on? No. He's the one who was groomed to send the boys to the Middle East. All this is the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. I don't mention people's names to be degradation toward them. It's just the facts. They're players in the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And the world's population is going to be reduced by these biological chemical agents. But you see, the mass media in America, CBS, NBC, ABC, Public Broadcasting, Turner Networks, which is now taking over the media in America, Time Magazine, the Saturday Evening Post, Life Magazine, all your big dailies, newspapers such as the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Chicago Tribune, Dallas Morning News, the ones that are the major outlets for news. Those who control the AP, UPI, and Reuters release of the news are members of the Council on Foreign Relations, all the board of directors. So they censor the news so the American people will not be told we're about to overthrow your government and put you into world government. They don't want us to know. But you see, they made one mistake. They repealed the fairness doctrine of the airwaves several years back. The fairness doctrine said that if I go on radio and say certain things and someone opposes my viewpoint, the radio or television station by law must give them equal time at no charge. Now that's why Bill Clinton is working so feverishly to get that reversed, so that people like myself and other people who know what's going on in the world today in Bible prophecy and the working for world government, so they can be silenced, because who can afford to give someone else equal time? I can't pay for it, and the radio and television station can't, so they'll just cancel our program so they don't have to offer an equal time for an opposing viewpoint. So you see, Bible prophecy is all coming together. The white horse of the apocalypse, the Masonic Lodge has been setting up churches called Christian all over the world, all over the United States, to divide. Their number one tactic is divide and conquer, divide and conquer. Find out what is displayed in the temple of the Mormons in Salt Lake City. All the Masonic symbols. We've got 2 former members sitting in this room right now that went into the temple. They know what's there. They even had plays where Lucifer was extolled, not Jesus Christ. So all these religions, the white horse of the apocalypse is running wild. The red horse of the apocalypse, the only 2 purposes is to take peace from the earth and kill mankind. Read it in your own Bible. What is the only fulfillment that could be in the 20th century? International red communism that has overthrown government after government and killed half the populations of every nation, in accordance with their reducing the population in half by the year 2000. And then when you come up with a black horse of the apocalypse and you see the spreading of famine all over Africa to destroy that whole continent, that's a part of the plan to get rid of the undesirable civilizations on planet Earth. And then when they pull the rug on the stock market, now that it's reached such record highs and there is nothing in the world worth the money that the stock of these companies, people are paying for it. So it's nothing more than a 1929 rerun, only with about 1,000% repercussions worse. And when it happens, you're going to have the black horse of the apocalypse. No economic system, famine, combination, no food in the stores, and if it's there, nobody can buy it. There's no money. And then when you come down to the pale horse of the apocalypse with this chemical, biological agents that are going to send disease epidemics and death all over the world. We're living in the time, and right at the door is persecution. That's next. What did Janet Reno say on the nationwide news, December 8th, 1995? She said, "We will have our anti-terrorism bill passed by Tuesday, the 12th of December, 1995. And within 90 days, we will have those who are giving an attitude of terrorism in this country under investigation." That means anybody in this country that knows Bible prophecy is going to be a target of Janet Reno. Why? Because they're going to have another 1,000 agents to send out to investigate. Why do you think they're building the prisons all over this country attached to the military bases? If they're closing the military, why are they building the prisons and modernizing them? It doesn't make sense unless they're going to use them. Bible prophecy is happening before our eyes. God Almighty made a wonderful statement in Revelation chapter 12. I'm going to read this statement, and if anybody's new here today, don't be excited, don't get upset, but just remember, you have to prove all things and hold fast to that which is good. God said in Amos 3 verse 3 and verse 7 also that He would do nothing unless He revealed it to His servants the prophets. There will be no movement of God's people to what is called a place of safety until He has revealed it. In Revelation 12, I have taken this and shown on many occasions how the Word, it says, the earth shall help the woman. When you look it up in the Strong's Concordance, it means either the whole globe, that's why they translated it earth here, or it could mean region. What if there were to be a state in the United States of America that were to come out of the Union? There was someone who gave me a vision that person had over 2.5 years ago. Said there would be a massive earthquake along the New Madrid fault line. It hadn't happened yet. But a part of that vision also was that a certain area of the United States would come out of the Union. Texas was one of those states, and maybe 2 or 3 adjacent states next to it. Do you realize what has been happening? Because here in Revelation 12, it says, when the dragon persecutes the woman, verse 14, to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place. God is already in preparation, preparing her a place. When you prepare something, it takes time, doesn't it? God moved me through a supernatural series of events in 1993 to this area, a place that I didn't even know existed, except they had a team called Dallas Cowboys, and they kept saying it was America's team. And of course, the only thing worth watching to me were the cheerleaders. You know, being male, everybody notices those things. And I admit it, I'm not a liar, you know. But anyway, so I came down here, and we moved our national headquarters down here. You know what started happening about the same time that this person came to me? There were 8 people that came to me with dreams and visions, and every one of them are happening. About the same time when I came down here without anyone's knowledge, totally in secret, a group of lawyers, state senators and representatives began checking how Texas was formed. They went back to 1835 when the state of Texas became a nation under the law of nations. Then they went to the 1845 treaty when the state of Texas became a part of the Union, the United States. They found that the United States never, ever fulfilled its part of the treaty. So all this time, according to the Supreme Court, which this has already gone to the Senate of the state of Texas and the House of Representatives, all the legal documents came out and went to the Supreme Court of the state of Texas. They said all the documents are accurate and correct. They said, no, Texas has acted on its own to be a part of the Union. The United States broke the treaty, all of it, and never really legally brought it about. So the state of Texas, in reality, is an independent nation, a republic, acting under the auspices of the United States. So, on December 8th and 9th, there were meetings held in San Antonio, Texas, of 1995, in which they're sitting down and they're planning a constitutional convention for the state of Texas. Then on Tuesday, the 12th of December, 1995, there will be a meeting of delegates from certain areas of the state of Texas who will be coming together to elect a pro tem president, which means a temporary president for the Republic of Texas. They will also elect an ambassador to represent Texas to foreign countries. Then on Wednesday, the 13th of December 1995, in the Alamo in San Antonio, Texas, these newly elected individuals will give their acceptance speeches. Then all the documents will be filed in the International Court of Justice in The Hague, Holland. The Supreme Court of the state of Texas has already said they have no legal jurisdiction and they will have to defer it to the World Court. I personally believe the United Nations, because the One Worlders will do everything they can to stop Texas from becoming an independent country. You know why? Because they will have no such thing as a Federal Reserve System. They will have no such thing as the Internal Revenue Service. They will go back to constitutional law. This is the whole purpose for Texas stepping out of the Union. It is my belief that God Almighty is behind this. I believe He is preparing a place. This is my personal belief based upon everything that's happened to me since I've been in the ministry. I cannot say details. I don't know. But we've all known that we've been coming to Texas for some reason. We know it. People sitting right here, other people across this country have had dreams and visions, and even one man on a shortwave radio that I didn't even know existed, which went around the world, and one person sitting in this room heard it. Another in Nashville, Tennessee, that speaks at the Feast of Tabernacles, heard it with his own ears, recorded it on cassette tape. A man said, my servant David J. will lead an ingathering of saints from a western state. I didn't even know it when God caused me to move down here. And all of you who have been around know that story. I won't repeat it. I believe God is preparing a place. You see, this book called the Bible is for Israel. Only other nations as they come into contact with Israel. It only makes sense to me that God would prepare a place for His people as a refuge from Satan and his demons, because it says the earth helped the woman. So I believe God will send millions of powerful angels to stop the United Nations when they try to stop Texas from becoming an independent republic. And as a result, possibly, and that's all I'm saying, possibly. This is not doctrine. God hadn't revealed it all yet, but He's shown us a series of events that have set in motion that it don't take 1 and 1, and don't take an educated person very long to figure 1 and 1's 2. But we'll wait and see. This is not a doctrine. I'm only keeping you updated on a possibility. And that possibility is you will be living in the Republic of Texas not too long from now. And this will not be a part of the United States of America. And there will be no one crossing borders without permission. There won't be someone coming from the outside in or from the inside out. Not without permission, because this will be a separate nation. And I believe somewhere within this state, God will prepare and reveal to His people, not just this little group sitting here, but His people who have a true heart, who has a true love of Him from all over this country. And they'll begin to be filtering down in this direction. And then when they see the United Nations and Bill Clinton, if he's still here, or the Soviet Union with their sneak missile attacks across the North Pole hitting some of our cities, which one person in this room had such a vivid dream that he cried for 6 days because of it. And when you read Ezekiel 38, the two of them, the vision and the scriptures, go hand in hand. I'm telling you, God is working, but the churches today have shut their eyes. They don't even know what the Holy Spirit is and what it's doing, that it will tell us. Doesn't it say in John 16:13, the Holy Spirit will lead you into all truth? The Bible was closed when John took the book of Revelation. How is He going to deal with us today if it's outside the pages of the Bible and it's not written down? Through dreams and visions, He says so. From one end of the Bible to the other. He says, if I want my servants to know something, I'll show it to them in a dream or a vision. And we've had many of them in the last 2 years. And they're all happening like clockwork. Brethren, I just wanted to bring you up to date on this last little bit at the end, is what is really happening in the state of Texas. We will have, in this auditorium Monday night, we'll do 4 television programs with Charles Collins from the state of Georgia. He's running for the presidency of the United States of America. He's already run in a straw poll in California. He just about tied Pat Buchanan and Alan Keyes, and he got as many votes as the next 8 candidates, including Robert Dole, combined. This man told me by telephone everything he stood for. Exactly what every one of us believe. That's what he stands for. Then a week from tomorrow, right here, we'll have television, 4 television shows made with, by then, the new President Pro Tem of the Republic of Texas, Mr. J.C. Van Kirk. And it will go out on television, nationwide, shortwave, worldwide, and it will go out on all our radio stations that blanket the country. The United States is going to know there's some people that God's hand is upon. They won't like it, but that's okay. The kingdom of God is going to come. You and I are going to be kings and priests. That's what we're hoping for. That's why we're here. That's why we're willing to forsake all if necessary. Because Jesus Christ has given us a vision. He's given it to us from the pages of the Bible that we are going to help mankind. Mankind is in desperate straits. And as long as there's a Satan and his demons around to deceive, man will continue to degenerate. But God is calling a few who dare to be different, who will dare to obey Him and live by every word that proceeds out of His mouth, and that will not quench the Holy Spirit will not despise prophecy, will not despise visions when we try the Spirit to see whether it's from God or the devil. And we're not going to be tricked. We're going to see to it that Jesus Christ rules in this church. Thank you for coming.